into the void.
Hey, what's up guys? So I know a lot of you have been asking for this video and calculations with Skirk and Escoffier confirmed to rerun next patch. And many of you are wondering how should you be investing in this team to get the most out of your Prima Gems. First of all, I do have a few disclaimers. Number one, the rankings are general advice, not set in stone. I like to think I'm a good source of information considering I'm not only a theory crafter, but importantly, I have used my C0 Skirk team to clear Dire every single time. Skirk has always got the job done for me, and I've also helped many viewers live on stream with their freeze teams with various investments. So I like to think I have experience with the nuances and especially like the 1%ers that can swing the difference between getting a clear and not getting a clear. I'm also pulling in my own manual calcs from Google Sheets, plus I'm creating sims, plus I'm using my own gameplay to try and combine everything for the overall best picture. But let's not forget, ultimately, we are mere subjects to Genshin's banner schedule. For example, both characters' weapons will be available on the same banner. So even if Escoffier's weapon might not be as high of a damage upgrade as some other increases, you might be able to get both Skirk and Escoffier's weapon at virtually the same time. Just like I could say a support's constellation is pretty decent, like maybe furina C1, but she might not be rerunning for a long time, so for the present day it really doesn't matter. So with that being said, here are my general recommendations, which I will break down later in the video, but for now I actually want to cover a few FAQs. So the first FAQ that a lot of people want to know, of course these three are basically fixed in any Skirk team. Escoffier is very important, furina is very important, we know this. What a lot of people are always very nervous about, Skirk has a lot of different potential teammates. Do they need to be pulling a specific one? And in my opinion, although there are nuances which we will cover, generally speaking, I would tell you guys, finishing Skirk's team is pretty optional. You don't need to pull a new fourth teammate if you have one of these, especially closer to the left. You have some of the most strong and most versatile options. I guess the further you go to the right, maybe you do want to consider pulling one of the more universal fourth teammates. However, as we know by now, there isn't that big of a difference between each of these, and rather than tunnel visioning that much about the fourth teammate, as we'll get into, some of the other investments are going to be definitive and quite significant damage increases. In my experience, I would say Seat Lali, Mona and Shenhe, generally speaking, are the most versatile Skirk teammates. And if you have any one of those, you should be more than happy. And the nuance is that most content that actually favors Skirk and favors freeze teams, a lot of Skirk content favors cryo application and also favors her burst playstyle or her hybrid playstyle. You know, bosses like the Secret Source Automaton, you have to do a lot of cryo hits and then you can get a nice burst window of damage with all its res decrease. Even something like the Tortoise, again, it favors a lot of cryo damage and a nice burst window. Similar thing with the Shock Trooper, you want a nice burst window. This is something that will matter more in Stygian Onslaught, but it is nice to know. A lot of this content that plays to Skirk's strengths wants Skirk to be as flexible as possible. And the fact that these three characters basically buff all of Skirk's damage and all of Skirk's playstyles is very nice. Seat Lali also gains additional value because there are quite a few mechanics where you really want to shield, which is also where Dahlia gets some advantage. He can actually boost Skirk's, between his talent here and his C6, he can actually boost Skirk's attack speed by quite a lot, to the point where you're actually indirectly getting cryo application. But then you'll notice there are some restrictions with characters like Dahlia, Yella, and Xingqiu. These characters are pretty good and pretty comparable when you are using Skirk's normal attack playstyle. But the problem is they aren't really buffing Skirk's burst playstyle. And on top of that, as I said, you aren't really running into that many situations where you're happy to have more Hydra application. Until more recently, I guess, because now we have this Pyro Crab. Again, overall, I do want to keep it simple, and as long as you have a character like this, you don't need to worry too much. So don't sweat it too much. If you are doing stuff like Dire Stygian, if you are trying to push those 1%ers, then again, you will notice some of the differences between these. For example, sometimes I use Shenhe, sometimes I use Seat Lully, and then more recently I've used Mona. But honestly, don't worry too much about it. The next FAQ is, what artifact set should they be farming for Skirk? Now I just want to see what the game is giving. Yeah, majority of people are farming galleries. However, some of you have probably seen a lot of theory crafting say that MH is the more optimal set. Me personally, I have always been farming for galleries, but I made this here. To be honest, I think this is the best overall take. Skirk has released for a long time now, and I don't really care that much about debating it anymore. You're just here, you're just watching this video because you want to know what to build. And this is my perspective, where, let me put it this way, I don't think there's ever been a time where using the MH set lets you beat content where you otherwise wouldn't. However, there has been a lot of content, especially content that relies on Skirk's burst and flexibility, where not using galleries is what costs you to run. And I've shown this several times in my live streams, the power of galleries and how it can actually make a difference. Genuinely, I think the main real advantage of MH, arguably the only real advantage, is you might have already farmed a very good set and you want to be efficient with your resin. You don't want to go through the grind of farming a new set, which is definitely fine, you know. But you should know, Gallery scales better with her signature weapon and her burst hybrid playstyle. If you're unsure about why Gallery scales better with her signature weapon, MH gives a ton of crit rate, which means once you pick up a signature weapon and you get this extra crit rate here, it's very easy to run into issues where you've got too much crit rate and you're actually losing that theoretical value of MH. With a 4-star weapon, I can get MH 2.5% stronger than galleries. However, once we switch to Skirk's signature weapon, MH is at such a high crit rate that you're actually losing a bit of value from Cryo Resonance giving an extra 15% crit rate. Then I'm actually getting galleries 3.2% stronger on top of being more flexible. Now, a lot of people probably wonder, how is galleries better than MH for Skirk's burst playstyle? Because when you use galleries and you use Skirk's burst, it actually pauses the normal attack buff. The thing is, in practice, when you use MH and you cast Skirk's burst, you're actually going to be lacking some crit rate. And on top of that, you aren't getting this massive burst damage buff. So in a way, it kind of defeats the purpose of using Skirk's hybrid playstyle to the point where it isn't actually outweighing the loss of the normal attack buff here. It's not the biggest difference, but it is one of those 1%ers that I've shown on stream. And recently on a viewer's account, they had a much better MH set than a gallery set, but we was actually failing to defeat the shock trooper in time with MH than we was with the weaker gallery set. So I would say, if you truly want to use the most optimal set, don't worry too much about the calculation differences, because the practical differences are actually more important. But I should say, you don't have to grind the gallery set now. You could just wait for a future strongbox update. I feel like galleries will be in the strongbox within the next few patches. The overall choice is yours, but you've heard my points. So before you invest anything extra, what is the starter investment of your freeze team? This is the craftable weapon from 10, Finale of the Deep on your Skirk. Get it refined, get it leveled, farm your galleries or your MH set, whichever one you want. For Escoffier, honestly, I think Favonius Lance is a pretty good budget option, and this will also work in the hardest content too. There's pretty much 3 main artifact sets for Escoffier. Golden Troops, the very generalist one. However, if you want to min-max, if you want to pump your Skirk's damage, then you either use Scrolls if you're not playing her with Seat Lully, or Noblesse if you are playing her with Seat Lully. Pick one of the 3, that's fine. Your Furina, Favonius Sword is a very good budget option. Basically, the best weapon to always play on your Furina, unless you've got a super high invested one. And then at this point, I would say get your Tenacity set. Obviously, if you only have Golden Troop, you can use that. But I think at this point, people, if you didn't get your Tenacities at Skirk's launch, you really should. It's basically free attack for the entire team. And then if you're playing Seat Lully, the Scroll set and TTDS is a more than perfect option. Same thing if you're playing Mona, TTDS is a great option. and you can use the Noblesse set on your Mona. Or if you're using Shenhe, Favonius Lance, it's a very good option. Pretty much whoever you're playing as your budget option, like Xingqiu, you want to use Noblesse or even Scroll set. But let's get into the vertical investments. So now we can get into the main part of the video. The first upgrade that I kind of want to talk about is, without actually spending primos, you might be able to get a small damage increase. And that is learning one of the Skirk combos. And no, it's not going to be one of the super dank Skirk combos, doing walk cancels, having to learn some crazy command sequence. Instead, I honestly think it can be worth learning a simplified version. So what it is Skirk's strongest hits are actually her first 2 normal attacks. So we want to get as many N2s as possible. And generally the best way of getting it is N2 and then D, dash. But obviously you can't dash more than twice in a row because of dash cooldowns. So every 2 N2Ds, you want to do the third one and cancel it with another thing rather than dashing. For example, you do 2, you dash, and then the next one you do a charge attack. Or you do 2 of them and then the third one you can cancel with her burst. Or you can actually do 2 and then just do a full N5 sequence, and you can even dash cancel the last one there. That basically is my combo, and it's a lot more simple than it sounds. So I'm just going to go into the DPS dummy here, and I'm going to show you the normal attack spam and then show you the damage increase I get with the simplified N2 combo. Okay, so with just the N5 combo that you're probably doing, I'm getting about 168, 169,000 DPS. And that's just with me dashing right at the end of the 5th hit. Like that. Now let's see the simplified N2D combo. So 1, 2, cancel with the Q. 1, 2, go all the way to the 5th one. 1, charge attack. Another charge attack. So you can actually get the timing to where your serpent stacks come back perfectly on time. So you do all 5. Serpent stacks come back again. Do a couple more. Get a charge attack there. And look at the DPS difference we're getting. So you got 174,000 DPS. The timing actually works great, so if you do want to, I'll give a notation of exactly what combo I was roughly doing there. But it's very intuitive. You don't really need to memorize the combo. Just try and get as many N2Ds as possible. So if I calculate that, it could lead to about a 3.5% damage increase, which is not much. You could say it's not really worth it, but it's not as hard to learn as one of the super dank combos. It's not going to be as big of an increase, but I think it is worth thinking about learning it. Okay, so the first real recommendation is going to be Skirk's signature weapon. This is pretty much perfectly tailored for her, and it's pretty much the biggest increase that you'll get early. Now, my numbers here are comparing versus a max refined Finale of the Deep. But the truth is that even some of the better options, some of these 5-star options that you might have, it's still very much worth getting the signature weapon first. And as mentioned before, it is going to be a weapon that increases the value of the gallery set. Or you could say decreases the value of the MH set. Now this is where it gets interesting, and this is probably something that most people are asking about. which is what do they get after Skirk's weapon. So there's 3 here around the same level, which is Escoffier C1, which gives 60 crit damage to the cryo characters in your team. There's also Skirk C1 and Skirk C2. Skirk C1 giving extra damage from your Void Rifts, and Skirk C2 giving nice QOL and damage increase. Now it's important to note my calculations are team damage increases, which is why these numbers might not be as big as you think, because these 2 are only buffing Skirk's damage and this here is only buffing the cryos. So you're not getting 100% of the value. So I actually think you can get it in 2 different orders. You can get Skirk's constellations first, or you can get Escoffier C1 first. They would be about the same damage increase though. What I would say is I really like Escoffier C1. And that's because all you have to do is just use her skill, and you have 100% uptime on this buff, which is very relevant in Stygian Onslaught, which we'll get into, because her skill has no requirement outside of using her skill, whereas her signature weapon, you have to use Escoffier's burst in order for her healing to work in order to activate this. Plus, if you get this, it will work in any team you play Escoffier in the future, unless there's some universe where you play freeze teams with hydro characters and then it kind of devalues this because this only buffs your cryo teammates. If you're wondering where the damage variation comes from, the exact damage you get does depend on how much crit damage your team has. If you've got a very low investment Skirk and you have like 160, 170 crit damage, then the 60 extra from Escoffier C1 is a ton. But if you have a pretty solid build like mine, for example, and you have over 200 crit damage, then you're getting less value from that C1. But it still should be relatively consistent and relatively good. I don't mind the argument that Skirk C2 can be gotten earlier because the damage increase is roughly the same anyway. They'll both be on the banners, so you can do what you want. I do appreciate Skirk C2 has nice flexibility and quality of life. It gives a bit more incentive to be playing burst mode Skirk and hybrid mode Skirk. Pick whichever one you want. The one consistent thing I would say is that all of those 3, you should go for them before getting Escoffier's signature weapon, unless you get Escoffier's signature weapon by accident. And that's because the value of her signature weapon can vary a lot. As I said before, one of the practical issues with Escoffier's weapon is that it requires her burst. I got this weapon, but honestly, especially in Stygian Onslaught, when you don't start off with full energy, something like Favlance is definitely a decent substitute. Favlance isn't amazing depending on the team you're playing. Like, for example, Furina doesn't do that much damage in Skirk teams, so you usually build a ton of ER on her. And then if you're playing someone like Seat Lally, you're not even using her burst. Skirk also doesn't really have a burst. So Favlance isn't that amazing. Weapons having trade-offs compared to constellations, which are just objective upgrades, that does lower the value of something like this. Although it does have a benefit that constellations don't have, which is that it's good on other Polom characters like Escoffier or Iansan are some popular uses. So that's why I still have it up there. As for the exact number, again, it depends on your investment. For example, on my account versus the training dummy, I'm getting towards the top end of that because my Skirk has a pretty good build. And because I'm funneling all the team's buffs into Skirk. The more invested your Skirk and Escoffier are, the more value you'll get out of having a good weapon on Escoffier and getting this extra attack buff for Skirk. Next upgrade, and this is something that many of you guys probably already have just because of how popular Furina constellations are. But if you don't, you're probably wondering how good are Furina's constellations. It's very similar to my Ayaka results. Furina's C1 is still a pretty good upgrade. It's not going to be as big of an upgrade as some of the early stuff, but it's still a nice one. If you're wondering how good Furina's C2 is, it's not very good at all. And that goes for most modern teams. As people have realized over time, Furina's C1 is more of the team damage increase. Furina's C2 is more of a personal damage increase. But in a lot of these modern teams, you're rarely building Furina these days for her personal damage. Even if you have constellations on Furina, you still want to be buffing the rest of the team, which is why her C2 isn't going to be that big of an increase. You will find, if you go to the training dummy, that you'll probably still get more damage building her as a full buffer with something like Favonia's sword. Is that sad? Maybe. Is that a sign that teams are just doing more and more damage and it's more and more power creep? Maybe. Instead, if you want to be optimal, at that point, you should probably just get Skirk constellations. This is pretty consistent with most modern teams. The truth is, very quickly, you'll get to the point where just trying to get to their C6 is just the biggest increase. To be honest, I'm not worried too much about specifics, just because if you're at the point where you're just going to get Skirk C6, you probably don't need that much more advice, to be honest. That's why after that, I just have some more optional stuff. Like we've got Shenhe's weapon, if you play her with Shenhe, or you've got Seatlali's weapon, maybe even some Seatlali constellations, but these are all very optional. Your damage is going to be ginormous by this point. So yeah, that's my overall recommendation order. If you want overall recommendations for a lower budget player, then you're probably stopping around here or something. If you are like me and you basically always play Skirk, I don't know if I'm always going to be able to clear diet with my C0 Skirk team. So if you're in the same thoughts and you're probably wondering, is it worth getting one or two of these just to prolong the longevity of your Skirk? Looking at these numbers, I would say it's pretty worth it. Getting one of these C1s, seeing how you like her damage, it's hard to go wrong with that. Now, is that going to be as big of a team damage increase as getting a more newer character? Maybe not, but this video is for Skirk players, it's not for meta slaves. And you know what, to be honest, the fact that you're able to do the end game constantly with Skirk, I guess it maybe is a meta opinion. Anyway, hopefully you guys found today's investment priorities video helpful. If you're someone on the fence about getting a Skirk Escoffier team, I personally would recommend getting them. Very fun to play, very nice designs, and very strong. You can say for the future, the choice is yours. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions that I didn't cover in the comments, and I'll see you next time, guys.